Specialist here at Lamp Earlyon. Today we are going to be looking at part 1 of IEP and the IEP process. Today we're going to be taking a general look at the different terminology you might hear throughout your IEP process. Keep in mind this is relevant to the IEP process here in Ontario, or at least in Toronto, as well as this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just a list to get you started with. And then next week's video, we're going to take a deeper dive of what you can expect in the IPRC and the IEP process. So we're just going to jump right into the video.
So before we begin, let's look at why it's so important to learn these different terminology and the lingo, especially when you're going to be exposed to it and you're going to hear even more terms being thrown around by educators, healthcare providers, and other professionals. It's incredibly important to know and to understand it, so that way this information can guide the questions that you ask, whether it to be to the other professionals or to your own child. So for example, when other service providers are pushing in or pulling out, do you understand what that means? Pushing in is when the professional is working with your child in the classroom setting, or pulling out is when they take your child to a separate location. And this is very important because then you can ask your child if they had speech class today, and if your child says they didn't, then you can ask and say, well, did they come to your classroom instead? So these are all very important, and then also it can guide how you ask questions, so that it's a little bit clearer for the school board or other professionals that you're working with as well, and if you ever have to write letters. So let's just jump into it. So the first one is accommodations. Accommodations are the strategies, supports, and or services that are required in order for the student to access the curriculum and demonstrate learning. Accommodations do not alter the provincial learning expectations for the grade level. There are 3 different types of accommodations that you might see. These are instructional accommodations, which changes the teaching method. So for example, additional software and stuff. Environmental accommodation changes the classroom or the school environment, so the seating arrangement or the lighting. And the third one is assessment accommodation, where changes that are required to show what the student has learned. In terms of modification, modifications are changes made to the grade level expectations for a subject or course to meet the needs of the student. For core subjects such as math or language, the expectations may be from a different grade level. But for other subjects, maybe history or social studies, when they get older, modifications may include significant changes to the number or the complexity of learning expectations. So some more general accommodations can include, but are definitely not limited to, large print textbooks, textbooks at home for home use, a locker with adapted lock, review of directions, using of mnemonics, which is the use of patterns or of letters, ideas, or associations that assist in remembering something. So for example, the directions, it's never eat shredded wheat or north, east, south, west. Having adaptive writing utensils, supporting auditory presentations with visuals, assistance in maintaining an uncluttered space, peer or scribe note-taking, a space for movement or breaks, just like in this picture, graph paper to assist in organizing or lining up math problems, using a tape recorder to record the teacher talking, books on tapes, preferential seating, provision of notes and outlines, having a communication tool between the teacher and the student, agenda book with checklists, having a visual daily schedule, having hands-on activities or using manipulatives, as well as following a rigid routine or schedule, alternate quiet and active time, as well as having rest breaks. So in terms of testing and or assessment accommodations, again, this list is not exhaustive, but these are just a very few examples of things that can be done, such as giving students additional time, giving them oral testing or untimed tests, having frequent rest breaks, giving a choice of test format, so for example, true, false, multiple choice, or essay, accepting short answers, maybe having open book or open note tests, providing study guides prior to the tests, highlighting key directions, maybe having the tests in a completely alternative site, or the use of a calculator or a word processor if a calculator or word processor is something that wouldn't be given. In terms of general modifications that can be done, some of the things that can be done is having a pass or a no pass option, modified grades based on the child's IEP, word bank of choices for answers to test questions, film or video supplements in place of reading text, rewording questions in simpler language, having projects instead of written reports, highlighting important words or phrases in the reading assignment. And in terms of behavior modification, some things that you might see can include breaks between tasks, cue expected behavior, having a contingency plan, using positive reinforcement or de-escalating strategies, using peer supports and mentoring, having parents sign homework, set and post-class rules, as well as having a chart progress and maintaining data. So now we're going to move on to case conferencing. A case conference is a meeting to discuss your child's needs. A case conference may be held to plan for your child's transition to school or to address any changes in your child's needs. Community agency staff and professionals involved with your child, as well as yourself, their teachers, any support staff or school administrators may also attend. You, as the parent or the primary caregiver, may also choose to bring someone with you to take notes or to speak on your behalf. The purpose of the meeting is usually to problem solve or to make plans to support your child. EAs, or educational assistants, educational aides, teaching assistants. Sometimes you might even hear the word pupil aide. This term is described by staff hired by the school boards to work with individual students under the supervision of the classroom teacher. The Identification and Placement Review Committee, or IPRC, is a committee made up of 3 people appointed by the school board, in which at least one of these members must be a principal or a superintendent. This committee identifies the student's exceptional learning needs and recommends special education placement for the student. The IPRC also documents student strengths and needs, which is sometimes called profile statements. The IPRC may also recommend support services and equipment. Exceptional students, as defined by the Education Act, are students who have been formally identified by the IPRC. An exceptional student has significant needs in the areas of behavior, communication, intellectual, physical, or multiple needs and meets the provincial and school board criteria for this identification. A student who has been identified as exceptional must be provided with the supports and services required to meet these exceptional needs. In addition, an IEP must be developed for the student within 30 days of identification at an IPRC. So what is an IEP? An IEP, or an individual education plan, is the plan that outlines the programs and services to be provided to students and is developed by the school in consultation with you, the parents, or the caregivers. It must include specific educational expectations based on the curriculum, an outline of the special education program and services that will be received, and a statement about the methods by which the student's progress will be assessed. The IEP must also be completed within 30 days after a student is placed in the IPRC. An IEP may also be developed for students who have not yet been identified through the IPRC to document accommodations, modifications, or alternate programs that the students may require. Parents must receive a copy of the IEP, and the IEP is to be reviewed each term or semester. So in grade school and in kindergarten, that is every reporting period or every report card. The OSR, or Ontario School Record, is the student file that contains all documents related to your child's education. The contents of the OSR and access to the information are authorized by the Education Act. So for example, report cards, IEPs, and assessment reports are all kept in your child's OSR. Your child's teacher, the principal, and others working with your child can also have access to the OSR. You as the parents or caregivers can also ask to see the contents of the OSR by contacting your principal. A parent guide is required by every school board to be developed as a guide for parents that outlines the special education services provided as well as the procedure for IPRC, deciding the student's placement or appealing these decisions as well. Many school board parent guides also contain answers to frequently asked questions and information on community resources. The picture on this screen is the Toronto District School Board's version, which you can find online. The Ministry of Education operates schools known as provincial demonstration schools that provide intensive programming throughout Ontario for children who are deaf or low hearing, deaf-blind, blind low vision, and or with a severe learning need. Residential programs are also offered at these schools for students who live too far from the school to travel daily, and that is defined as either being 70 minutes or 115 kilometers away from the school. Resource rooms, or otherwise known as resource withdrawals, is a separate setting, either another classroom or a smaller room, where a special education program can be delivered to one student or to a small group. These rooms are used in a variety of ways, ranging from instruction, homework assistance, meetings, so for example, your IEP meetings can happen in these rooms, or to be used as an alternative social space. These rooms can also be where children are assessed or tested, as well as also being used as opportunities for behavior interventions. School health support service programs refer to services provided within the schools for students that have health needs by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. The types of services provided can include dietitian services, nursing care, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy for eligible students. The referrals from the school principal are required to access the program, and the process requires parent consent. The school team is comprised of teachers and support staff for the school, and they meet to discuss individual students who may be having difficulty in the classroom. The purpose of this team is to review the students' progress and intervention strategies that have been used by the classroom teacher and to develop a plan for the student. The student plan may include new strategies for the classroom teacher to use or a referral for any additional assessment. Parents of children who refer to school team are usually invited to attend the team meeting or to provide input. Depending on the school or the school board, a school team can have a different name, and your classroom teacher or your principal can let you know what the proper terminology is. So for example, it might not be school team, it can be also called program development team, in-school team, or school-based support team. So just ask the school, classroom teacher, or the principal what the proper term is. The SEAC, or the Special Education Advisory Committee, is a committee that is composed of local associations and representatives, such as the Easter Seals of Ontario, as well as their trustees. Every board is required to have a Special Education Advisory Committee, and the purpose of this committee, which usually meets on a monthly basis, I'm not too sure during the pandemic, or maybe they're doing everything online, is to advise the school board on special education issues. Meetings are also open to members of the public. A special education plan is a plan for education programs and services that the school boards will provide, and each school board is required to have one. The special education plan must be reviewed annually and a report submitted each year to the ministry identifying any changes. Again, the picture on the screen is the Toronto District School Board Special Education Plan of 2020, which you can access online. A special education program is defined in the Education Act as an educational program that is based on and modified by the results, continuous assessments, and evaluations, and that includes a plan containing specific objectives and an outline of educational services that meet the needs of an exceptional pupil. Special education services is defined in the Education Act as facilities and resources, including support personnel and equipment necessary for developing and implementing a special education program. A special education teacher or a resource teacher are teachers that have additional training in the education system of students with exceptional learning needs. They are usually assigned to work with groups of students throughout a school day, but some resource teachers also work with a specific group of students for a majority of the school day as well. In addition, these resource teachers may also look after the IPRC preparation, arrange case conferences, assist in ongoing assessment, evaluation and reporting, facilitate placements, or act as a liaison with service agencies and arrange for transportation. And finally, a transition plan is when students who have an IEP must have a transition plan as required under the Ministry of Education. Transition plans can be used for a variety of different situations depending on the student's needs, and can include, but are not limited to, transitioning into school from a preschool service, other school boards, or other care and treatment programs, transitioning between grades, divisions, or schools, transitioning into and out of secondary school, or transitioning in between activities, subjects, or classes. A transition plan can document the strategies and support the student will require for the transition event and will also identify who will be responsible for this transition activity. Some more general things to consider while you're going through this process is to keep informed, read more about your child's learning concerns, watch videos, or attend workshops. It can help you be familiar with your child's specific needs. Explore your child's strengths so that you can work with the school to find ways that they can best support how they learn by utilizing their strengths. Keep and organize paperwork, which is key. Make sure to keep copies of all report cards, progress reports, multidisciplinary evaluations, IEPs, medical records, mail, helpful homework samples, and other documents. They can provide really good insight into your child's learning concerns and how much progress they are currently making. If your child has an IEP, you can create an IEP binder to keep all your paperwork in on. You can also try to build relationships with your child's teachers, as well as the school psychologist, speech therapist, and or any other provider you're working with your child. Building these relationships with the whole team can keep the lines of communication open, which therefore leads to less chances of misunderstanding if everyone knows and is talking to each other. Ask questions. It's important to make sure you fully understand your child's programs and accommodations before you give your consent to services. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification, request further evaluations, or express your disagreement with the school's recommendations regarding services. It's a good idea to keep any requests in writing. Keep copies of these requests and use a communication log to keep track of who you spoke to and when. Stay calm and collected. Remember that the teachers and other school staff members involved are there to help, even if you disagree with them. Make a list of the topics you want to cover in important meetings. Learn the phrases you can use to redirect conversations and diffuse tense situations. Also consider bringing a friend or a relative or someone that's on your side who can take notes for you and help keep you organized and stay on track. Remember that you are also a part of the team, and you're the most crucial part of the team. Parents and caregivers should not feel pressured by school staff to make decisions. Keep in mind that you are an equal member of the decision-making team. So while it's important to be receptive to the school staff thoughts, you don't have to agree to something you think goes against what is best for your child, because like we always say, you know your child the best. Know you and your child's rights. Learn about you and your child's rights under the Education Act and the Disability Education Act. Stay informed about your school's legal obligations to provide your child an evaluation and other services. You can also speak with local agencies about finding some advocates to help you during these important meetings. Talk to your child. Touch base with your child and about how school's going. It's incredibly important to know if they're using these accommodations in your child's IEP, or if they've spent time with, for example, speech therapists as planned. This helps you make sure that the plan is being implemented and being followed, and then you can teach your child phrases that they can use to self-advocate for themselves when you are not there with them. And lastly, communicate regularly. IEP meetings and parent-teacher conferences are great opportunities to get an update on your child's progress. But there are also other times and ways to get updates. You can email their teacher with questions. PTA meetings may provide insight into curriculum changes and other resources that could affect your child. It's helpful to fill out a contact list too. Keep it handy so you know who at school to reach out to about various topics. And finally, just before we wrap up this video, let's take a very quick glance at the Education Act. So I've been mentioning the Education Act throughout this entire video, but let's take a very quick glance at what it actually is. So the Education Act, or Bill 82, are provisions governing special education in Ontario, and these provisions can include the responsibilities of school boards to provide or to agree with another board to provide, in accordance with regulations, special education programs, and special education services for their exceptional pupils. A special education program is defined as an educational program that is based on and modified by the results of a continuous assessment and evaluation of the student, which now includes a plan or an IEP containing specific objectives and an outline of the educational services that meets the needs of these exceptional students. It's also established an Ontario Special Education Tribunal where parents can make these appeals through the board, and the Ontario Special Education Tribunal will hear the appeals brought to parents and to make the final and binding decisions concerning the identification or placement of an exceptional student. It also outlines the responsibility of the ministry, which is to require school boards to implement procedures for the early and ongoing identification of learning abilities and needs of Ontario students, to define exceptionalities of students and to prescribe classes, groups, or categories of exceptional pupils, and to require the use of these definitions by the school boards, to provide an appeal process for parents and caregivers concerning special education identification and or placement decisions, as well as to ensure that special education programs and services are provided without payment of fees by school boards to their exceptional students in accordance with the Education Act and the subsequent regulations. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you have any questions, or if you would like a parent advocate during your IEP and IPRC meetings, please feel free to contact me. My information is in the description box below, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.